Listen up. It's time for a politically entertaining exclusive interview.
Joining us today on Politically Entertaining, he is a criminal defense attorney at Brooker Law Group in Houston, Texas. He has a show on Facebook Live called QB Law TV, and something that I can't wait to discuss with him. He's not a fan necessarily of voting on the presidential election, so we will discuss that in a moment. But Quinon Brooker, I want to thank you for joining us today, brother.
Hey, thank you for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
No problem, man. Before we get into what I mentioned as far as, with the election and politics, I wanted you to talk more about your Facebook Live show, QB Law TV. What can viewers expect if they were to tune in, and how did it come about, and how long have you been doing it?
Hey, I really appreciate that, man. When I first saw the live function on Facebook, I saw a friend do it, and I thought that it was a cool way to kind of interact. And I wanted to really take people into what I do as a criminal defense lawyer. And so I started out on Periscope, which I believe is a creature of Twitter, but I didn't really have a very large Periscope following. I think I may have had maybe 100 people that followed me on Periscope, and I didn't really get a whole lot of feedback. And a lot of the feedback that I got was from people I didn't know. So I thought, man, I got close to 5,000 friends on Facebook. Let's try it from the perspective of Facebook. And the initial show that we did, I think we had something like 500 views the first night. And so I thought that would be a great way to just really connect the people that I knew and some people that I just have, I guess, a general relationship with. And a lot of people tuned in. A lot of people reached out, asked questions. And it was just really, really fun to kind of do it that way. So that's how I got into doing the show, and we called it QB Law TV because I refer to a lot of things that are really creatures of my mind, or just some of the things that I've learned. I call that QB Law. And this was, in my mind, a perfect way to kind of transition it to social media. So when I do broadcast, I do it on Thursdays at 8 o'clock. Right now we're in off season during the summer, but we'll be back really soon. And when we do, I'll make the announcement on Facebook. And it's every Thursday at 8 p.m. And the show usually goes for at least 60 minutes, and sometimes, depending on the subject matter, it goes a little longer. But that's how we kind of got started, just really frustrated with some of the things that we've been seeing socially, particularly as to how it affects us as black people. And, a lot of people, I tell my friends all the time that are lawyers, I'm like, man, we do this stuff all the time, and we're always around lawyers. But, many of our friends and family, they don't really get that opportunity. So let's talk about what it is to actually go through the justice system, whether it's civil court or criminal court, because a lot of people just really don't know. So that was the original intent, and we started to kind of splice social issues in there as well. And that's how we came up with the format.
When I spoke to you before we conducted the interview earlier this weekend, you were telling me how you were in the off season of the show, and so much had happened with Alton Sterling to Philando Castile. So we definitely we're glad that we're able to give you the opportunity during the off season to express some of the thoughts you may have on some of those issues that we'll get to in a moment. I wanted to talk to you about your profession as a lawyer. On training day, Denzel Washington had the line that I like. It's not what you know, it's what you can prove. As a lawyer, do you take on clients that you may necessarily not believe whether or not you may not think that they're not guilty, but you feel like you can win the case, or do you only take on cases that you actually believe the person in not being guilty? I don't know if I asked that correctly, but do you get what I'm asking?
I do, and that's a great question, and that's a question that as a lawyer we hear all the time, especially a criminal defense lawyer, because people tend to think that if you are a criminal defense lawyer, then that must in some way speak to your character, right? That you will actually represent a person who may or may not have committed a crime. But, my view on this changed a lot. When I originally went to law school, I had just finished up my MBA. In fact, I had graduated with my MBA on that Friday, and I started law school on that Monday. So I anticipated that I was going to do some sort of civil litigation or some sort of transactional law. But when I got to law school, I just really fell in love with litigation in general, being in the courtroom, and with criminal law, you tend to be in the courtroom a lot. And you tend to, I mean, a hearing could just break out just over nothing. You could just have a hearing. But that really doesn't really happen in civil court. So I fell in love with just the idea of just really being in court and litigating, trying cases and things. And now, I guess my background in, the pride that I have in our people and just some of the struggles that we've dealt with, this is like the perfect blend for me because at heart, I'm a constitutional lawyer. And so what I do is I defend people who really are challenged by the government. And our Constitution gives us a lot of rights and powers to exercise our freedoms against government oppression. So for me, criminal defense is just kind of a good fit. And so when you ask that question, the first thing I do is I think like a constitutional lawyer. I say to myself, well, in reality, I actually want the person to tell me whether they did it. So if a person comes into my office and is accused of murder, I literally want that person to be honest with me and say, hey, you know what, QB, Mr. Brooker, I killed this person. That helps the case, and that helps the defense. So I don't have a moral issue with defending people that may or may not be guilty of a crime or may not have committed a crime, because the reality is they are still entitled to a defense, whether they did it or not. They are entitled to due process. They are entitled to representation under the Sixth Amendment. They are entitled to the opportunity to have a trial. They're entitled to an opportunity to be judged by their peers. So whether they are found guilty or whether they plead guilty or whether we win a case that perhaps we should not have won under the facts, it's still their right. And so I see myself as really an instrument of exercising people's rights under the Constitution. And it just so happens that as a black man, I find, and also as a black lawyer, I find that black people are, the statistics will bear this out. We call this empirical evidence on the show. We find that black people are arrested more, they are prosecuted more severely, they're punished more severely in every state in this country. So in every state, no matter what the demographics are, black people, there are more black people in prison than really anyone else. And that doesn't really bear out when it comes to the number of black people that actually live in this country. We only comprise 13% of the population, but we comprise close to 40% of the prison population. That doesn't bear out. So when you have those situations, whether a potential client tells me that he or she did it or not, I am still going to work to win the case.
QB, I'm going to jump in here. This is Frank, and
Sure.
That was a great lead-in that you said to my question. You mentioned, blacks being unfairly prosecuted potentially and arrested at an alarming rate. And one of the things we talk about on this show is we talk about people voting in local elections and how important that is. And one of the offices that people overlook a lot of times is the district attorney. In most places, it's an elected office like the mayor or city council. And a lot of people don't realize that in places like Ferguson and other places where a majority black population was not voting, and you have, a crooked district attorney potentially prosecuting cases in a certain way. Have you seen, in your experience, areas affected by, minorities where, there's problems with minorities getting arrested, and they're the majority of the population, and yet they're not voting, and they have a district attorney, and you're trying cases, and you feel like the district attorney is basically trying to railroad these clients?
Frank, thank you, man. Absolutely. The local election is, in my opinion, the election that will affect you more tomorrow. And so, it's interesting because in Texas, judges are elected, district attorneys are elected. Some states they're not, but here they are. And I found in my practice, and I've been practicing close to 10 years, I found that the judges and the district attorney, the outcome of the election generally follows the presidential election. So in other words, like when President Obama was elected in 2008, we had a slew of Democratic judges get elected. If I can recall, two or three, a couple of black judges, because Harris County is the largest county in Texas. It's the fourth largest county in the country. We have 22 felony district courts, and we have now 16 misdemeanor courts. That's a huge criminal system. It's totally dedicated to criminal law. Every other county in Texas is significantly smaller than Harris County, so there's Houston. So what we found is that when President Obama got elected, a lot of Democratic judges got elected, and things were different. I mean, I started to see differences. We would file motions and things with judges that in the past we anticipated that these motions wouldn't work. And with these new judges, at the time, we got those things done. In fact, there was one judge who, he was a very liberal judge. He was a Democrat. He had tattoos, and he didn't wear a tie, and he would chew gum on the bench and things of that nature. And, I mean, defense lawyers would have bench trials. I mean, we would go in there and be like, no, we don't want no jury. We want a bench trial. We want this guy to try the case. You know, kind of knowing that he was going to have a really people-centered stance as opposed to a prosecutorial stance in the case. So, yeah, man, I mean, we see this stuff. Like, in President Obama's second term, a lot of other black lawyers tried to get on that bandwagon, and you know, we were only marginally successful because it was a midterm type of thing. You know, President Obama had already been in. A lot of black people didn't come out to vote. So a lot of Democratic judges didn't win. In fact, a few of the Democratic judges had lost their seats during, I guess, 2012. So we do see that. I mean, the voting is critical on a local level. The sheriff, the district attorney. Right now we have a very hotly contested DA's race that's coming up with a woman who was kind of grandfathered in because her husband was the DA. He died. She somehow got appointed as DA, and there's a lot of issues down here now. I don't know if you guys heard, but they placed a victim, a woman with a mental illness. The DA permitted her subordinate to place a victim, a rape victim, in jail for fear that she would leave, and they wanted her testimony. So that's a big thing that's going on right now. It's like, how do you put a rape victim in jail? These are the types of things that we see from a certain segment of our society, and, you know, usually it's the right wing, the conservative, the Republican judges and DAs that tend to take this hard stance for law enforcement, and it always seems to somehow hurt the people. So absolutely, Frank, we see when people don't participate in the voting process, and when I say people, I'm talking mostly black people, Latinos. When we don't participate in that process, it hurts us directly with respect to these local elections.
I mean, that was a great answer, amazing perspective. And so with that in mind, I want to ask another follow-on question to that. So, you know, sometimes you watch, I watch a bunch of Law & Order, and obviously it's just a TV show. This is a two-part question. You know, how similar, when you try a case, how similar is it to, say, trying a case in Law & Order for the defense? And then also on top of that, there was one particular episode of Law & Order that really stood out to me. It probably was about three or 4 years old, where basically the judge was had a deal set up with the district attorney where he was sending kids to prison for minor offenses for basically a kickback from the prison. Have you encountered any case like that? And so you can just answer those two.
Yeah, not a problem, man. Law and Order is good. You know, none of that stuff is really 100% accurate, but Law and Order is pretty good. What we look at as trial lawyers, we tend to look at the objections that are made, because the objections that are made are purely legal. They follow what we call the rules of evidence. And although the rules of evidence, we have a common law set of rules of evidence that we all kind of learn, no matter what state, but then every state also kind of alters them a bit. But that's what most of the lawyers look at, because in most of these law shows or law movies, you'll have a lawyer make an objection, and then he'll just start arguing. So he'll say, like, objection, he can't do that because this night it was raining, and we all know that it wasn't raining. You know, they'll start talking, but that's not how the objections go. I mean, you object, and then you give a legal term, objection relevance, and that's pretty much it. And so Law and Order, they're on point. I mean, they'll make an objection, and it'll be like, Law and Order rule, they'll say objection rule 403. And that's a legitimate objection. They won't go on these long tangents and things that we tend to see in some of the other more fabricated shows. So Law and Order is pretty close, although, of course, they're usually solving the entire issue within an hour, and that usually doesn't happen in real life. But with respect to Part B, the actual case where that comes from, it was a Pennsylvania case, and I'm originally from Pennsylvania, from Philadelphia, but there was a judge in Pennsylvania that was doing exactly what you outlined. He handled the juvenile docket for that particular county, and kids would get in trouble in school for a minor offense, and they would somehow wind up going to these, for all intents and purposes, prisons. And they would spend time there, and these prisons happened to be privatized. And in this particular case, this judge was an interested party. He had financial interest in the prison. So, usually with Law and Order, they base it off of something real. I have not seen that. I don't do a whole lot of juvenile law. I have a couple of juvenile cases right now, but I don't do a lot of juvenile law. And in Texas, a juvenile is 16 and under. So I haven't seen that, thank God, because that would be a travesty if we encountered anything like that. But it is based on a real case, and I mean these things have happened. And now I was very interested in that case because I was wondering whether it was children from Philadelphia who are usually going to be black kids, but it wasn't. I mean, he was sending white kids up and ruining their lives. There's actually a Netflix documentary about the case. I can't remember the name of it, but I'll check and I'll send it to you guys, and maybe you'll check it out. But very interesting stuff. Sadistic, I believe. Obviously, he lost his ability to practice law, and I believe he had to do some federal penitentiary time as well. But we do see it.
I'll be very interested in seeing that. We are talking to Quinon Brooker on Politically Entertaining. He's a defense attorney at law, has a Facebook Live show that you can check out, QB Law TV. Very busy man. In addition to being an attorney, he also coaches his son's football team, so we really thank him for coming on. I teased it at the beginning of the interview as far as how you feel about presidential elections and voting in them. So what do you say to someone that says, because I want to get your stance on it correct, you feel like voting presidential elections that high up, it doesn't matter who's in office because the plight of black people and minorities in this country doesn't really change. Is that pretty much how you feel about presidential elections?
Yeah, that sums it up. I mean, here's the thing. It's not that the President of the United States can't help black people. We know that the President has tremendous power. Right. Obviously we have a three-layered system of government, and the President's powers are supposed to be limited. However, the President has spending power. The President has war power. The President has executive authority. There are so many things that the President of the United States can do. Veto power. But what we've seen, at least during my lifetime and when you read history, we've never seen a president that has made any executive action that significantly changes the circumstance of black people. Now, let's be real clear. We know, there's a lot of, Abraham Lincoln, Emancipation Proclamation. My views on that are that freeing the slaves was not Abraham Lincoln's primary objective. It was a consequence of the conditions of the country at that time. Slavery was the issue. But if Lincoln could have kept slavery intact while also keeping the nation intact, he would not have provided us with the Emancipation Proclamation. That would not have happened. So when you look at it, like when you look at President Obama's term, there has been not one executive action that has been implemented by this president that has directly affected the condition of black people. There are some things that he's done that have indirectly helped, or at least appeared to help, but those actions, those executive actions, also helped other people. And so, for example, his strong support of non-discrimination of same-sex marriage. Well, my personal view of that is no person should be discriminated against. I don't care what it is that you do. That's my whole issue with racism. I mean, discrimination against anyone is an injustice. So I would actually tend to agree with him. However people want to live their lives is their business. But that was an action that helped people of same-sex marriages and same-sex relationships. That wasn't an executive order or an executive stance that helped black people. I heard one lawyer say, well, he visited the federal penitentiaries and then he issued all of these presidential pardons for nonviolent drug offenses in prisons. And that let a whole lot of black people free. Yes, it did. But again, that wasn't specifically tailored to black people. Now, we also know that in 2012, President Obama issued financial support for Holocaust survivors that lived in the United States. And right now there are about 130,000 Holocaust survivors in this country that live here. So the ones that are living below the poverty line, he issued a yearly payout for 5 years, totaling in $12 million for those individuals. Those are actual funds that will go to these people because of something that occurred in 1940-something in Europe. I mean, this is the type of thing that baffles me. This is a black president, and he issued an executive order that pays out millions of dollars to a group of people that were harmed. And the Holocaust was terrible. We all know. I think we all would agree with that. But yeah, these people weren't even Americans when this happened. They just happened to be Americans now, and they happened to live under the poverty line, so he happened to give them $12 million. Why is it that every other nationality, race, group of people, culture of people that have been harmed in some way, why is it that they get actual recompense from our government? But black people who had been here arguably before 1619, which is when the first slaves were documented to be here, but why is it that black people don't get anything? When am I going to get my money? When are you going to get your money? This is the type of thing that baffles me. So if President Obama, who is the son of a Kenyan, if he won't issue an executive order to pay us restitution, to do things that make our lives better, and I'm not talking about, we need to change the criminal justice system so that it's better for everybody. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about something specifically for black people, like every other nationality has got. Native Americans, they receive reparations. Japanese Americans, they receive reparations. Yep. Now we have Jewish Americans receiving reparations for something that happened in World War II, but black people, still nothing. So if President Obama won't use his executive authority to make sure that we get paid, why do I think Hillary Clinton is going to do it? A woman whose husband, when he was president, he issued executive orders that, in fact, made our lives worse. So, and certainly no one would argue that Donald Trump has the best interests of black people in mind. So here we are talking about Hillary Clinton and Trump and who's the lesser of two evils and why, when it doesn't matter. Because at the end of the day, the condition of black people will remain the same. We're last in income, we're last in home ownership, we're last in wealth, and we're first in imprisonment. Those are the statistical numbers. I mean, you can look it up yourself. This condition has not changed in the last 100 years. So why do I think it's going to change now with the election of Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? It's not.
The points you bring up, especially with the Japanese Americans and even to a certain extent with the Holocaust survivors, is a point that I bring up as far as why can't black people get reparations. I haven't made that point much on the show, but in private conversations I have, so I really thank you for pointing that out. I want to try to give the counter argument to what you said. Would it be fair to say that, okay, a president may not necessarily pass an executive action to directly affect black people in a positive way, but would it be prudent for a black person to vote in a presidential election to keep a particular candidate for doing more harm, in the case of like Reagan being president and how he, helped facilitate crack cocaine into a lot of inner cities, or Bush with going to war? A lot of times, a lot of lower income people are the ones that are go off to war. And even with judges in Texas, you guys vote on your judges, but in a lot of states, the president, they appoint these judges to be voted on in the Senate in different states and different districts as judges. So would that be enough reason to counter your argument and say, okay, we can't expect a president to do exactly, directly something for black people, but we can elect somebody that won't bring about more harm, like a Donald Trump, or not just Donald Trump, but any other candidates in the past. Would that be something that you would be open to listening to and agree?
I hear that. I mean, I hear you, but this is how I would respond. Firstly, yes, the president of the United States does have the power to appoint federal judges, not state judges. And so in that respect, you have to be very careful with who you choose to vote on, if that's your choice, to vote on a presidential election. They do have also their power to appoint, obviously, nominees for the Supreme Court. But here's my response. I tend to go back and look at the policies of past presidents and past elected officials, just so we can be clear on what these people actually did. But in general, I'll answer your question in general, then I'll go back and try to provide some support.
Okay.
There is no number that is less than zero. And so when we talk about how a president may be the lesser of the two evils, or we talk about how a president may put us in a worse position than we're in, I'm going to be honest. My concern is black people. And some would say that that's maybe a selfish view, but my belief is that there is an actual war against the black man. And I firmly believe that based on what I see and what I read and what I study. This is not a hunch. This is something that I have thought out very, very diligently. I have researched very, very diligently. There is a war against black people, particularly in this country. Really, it's a worldwide war, but particularly in this country, there is a war against us. And so when I think about that, I ask myself, what should be my concern? Should I be concerned about the economy in general? Should I be concerned about the Supreme Court in general? Should I be concerned about the Senate in general? Or should I be concerned about how those things affect black people? And so I start there. How does my decision to act or not to act affect black people at the end of the day? And what I've seen is that we have been last in every statistical category of note for really the past 200 years. And that hasn't changed. There's never been a time where we really have demonstrated any significant growth other than Reconstruction. And that lasted for 8 to 12 years. Right after the Civil War, all of these rights and things were being passed, and we were being elected, and we were able to do different things in industry and in education. But then you have Jim Crow come along and really just eradicate all of the progress that had been made. Then you have 100 years of lynching occur to incite terror within our families and things of that nature. So there's never been a time where we've ever really progressed. We've always been last. And so when I think about, should I vote for Donald Trump or should I vote for Hillary Clinton, at the end of the day, neither one of them are going to implement policies that are going to change the condition of black people. Neither one. And I have to look at Hillary Clinton, what she's done, because she was an elected official. And as an elected official, she chose to lead a charge against Gaddafi and murder him. And you ask yourself, what does that have to do with America? What does that have to do with our national security? But when you really look at the facts, Gaddafi was looking into creating an African economic system with all of the nation's leaders in Africa, the continent of Africa. And had they been successful in creating a unified economy with a unified monetary system, it would have destroyed the economies of the West. And I strongly believe that that was the reason. Look, they talk about how he was a terrorist, he killed his own people. Man, that nation was flourishing.
We give money to ruthless dictators all the time.
In fact, to get our own political agendas accomplished. And so when I look at what she did particularly, and then when I look at her husband, I mean, he passed legislation here that was, is interesting because the purpose of which was intended to fund local law enforcement agencies. But when you look at that funding and what it's created a militarized police force that, I mean, I was talking to some kids at church a couple of months ago, and I was like, man, when I grew up, a police officer had a revolver, a nightstick, and a funny-looking hat. That's all they had. But when you look at police today, they have tanks, they have helicopters, they have planes, they have AR-15s, they have body armor piercing. They look like RoboCop. They have all of these toys, and those toys come from funding. There's it's called the Byrne Foundation, BYRNE. This is all based on funding from the federal government to really militarize local police forces. And what do you want to do when you got a bunch of toys? You want to play with them. And you're not going to play with them against, the people that can actually fight back. You're going to go play with them against the helpless. So these are the policies that have been passed under these people. So if you're not going to do anything for me, why should I give you a vote? I mean, how does that help the situation? To me, it doesn't help anything.
Brooker Law Group, QB Law TV is the show on Facebook Live. When it gets going, let me know. I'll make sure we post it on our page as well.
Appreciate that.
Thanks for coming on, man. We appreciate you coming on, and we'll talk to you again. Quinon Brooker, everybody.
Okay, brothers. Take care.